On May 4th, 1911, the beloved dog of a famous magician died while he was touring in Edinburgh, Scotland. The man, known as the Great Lafayette, was completely devastated. He arranged for his canine companion to be embalmed and buried with a high-profile ceremony, and he told those around him, with a terrible certainty, that without his adored pet, he himself surely would not live much longer. In this case, as would ultimately prove to be true, the Great Lafayette was horribly right. The man who would later become the Great Lafayette was born in Munich in 1871. Sigmund Neuberger began his career in entertainment working in vaudeville in the United States in 1884. At that time, vaudeville was one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the country, with theatres presenting variety shows featuring up to a dozen different performers who could specialise in anything: dance, singing, magic, or any other talent. Sigmund's first act was an archery demonstration, performed with great skill and dramatic flair. It was enough for him to make a living, but he did not achieve great fame until much later. Inspired by the Chinese magician Qing Ling Fu, who at that time was an extremely well-known figure, he began incorporating magical effects and illusionist tricks into his routines. Over time, his act grew into something unique. Magic and illusion were important components of all his shows, but they were blended with elaborate staging and impressive feats of skill. He was especially known for his ability to disappear from one part of the stage and reappear in another, or to change costumes quickly and flawlessly. One of his most famous acts, for example, was a recreation of the coronation of King Edward VII, in which he played each and every role himself. The Great Lafayette's unique acts soon began to attract attention, and he developed a huge following both in the United States and in the United Kingdom. He travelled back and forth between the two countries, performing sold-out show after sold-out show. The money never stopped coming in, and he eventually lived a life of luxury. That life was shared with only one companion, his dog, Beauty. Beauty was a mixed-breed terrier whom Sigmund showered with affection and attention. The dog had been a gift from the famous magician and escape artist Harry Houdini as a sign of the great friendship and respect between the two performers. Beauty lived a completely privileged life, especially when compared to the situation of countless dogs in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Beauty ate the best food available, enjoying most nights a 5-course meal prepared by a professional chef. She had her own bedroom, a diamond-studded collar, and a gold bowl for drinking water. To avoid hurting her paws, she was carried in a specially built cart, and she had a comfortable seat reserved exclusively for her in Sigmund's automobile. This was useful because she accompanied him everywhere, and, on occasion, even took part in his performances. Sigmund never wanted to be separated from his pet. One phrase frequently attributed to him, which he had engraved on a plaque displayed in his home, was, Unfortunately, on May 1st, 1911, Beauty fell ill. The Great Lafayette was visiting Edinburgh at the time, where he was scheduled to perform at the Empire Palace Theatre. Sparing no expense, the magician hired a local doctor and several nurses to care for his beloved pet. But Beauty was 15 years old, a very advanced age for a dog, and she had spent many of those years eating extremely rich, fatty, and abundant meals. She was not in good health, and her condition only worsened despite all the care she received. On May 4th, Beauty died. Sigmund was devastated. The dog had been the main object of his affection, and her loss left him completely shattered. Just as he had done while she was alive, he insisted on giving her only the best. Beauty was embalmed at a local funeral home, where he visited her daily until she could be buried. And when the time came to choose a burial place, Sigmund insisted it be in one of the most distinguished cemeteries in the city. This was something that was normally not allowed, since most cemeteries accepted only human burials. However, Sigmund was willing to spend large sums of money to secure a place for his pet, and after paying £300, he managed to obtain a plot in Edinburgh's Piers Hill Cemetery, on the sole condition that when he eventually died, he would also be buried there. Beauty was laid to rest, and still grieving, the Great Lafayette continued with his series of performances at the Empire Palace Theatre. But the loss of his pet affected him deeply, and during some shows, audience members said they saw him trembling with sorrow. In private, backstage, Sigmund insisted that without Beauty, he himself would not live much longer. On May 9, 1911, less than a week after Beauty's death, one of the final performances took place at the Empire Theatre. The first part went well, and the show moved toward its climax, a 25-minute piece called The Lion's Bride. It was an elaborate finale that told the story of a kidnapped princess who was about to be thrown to a hungry lion. To represent this story, a real horse and a real lion were brought onto the stage and before the eyes of an exhausted audience of 3,000 people. The great Lafayette magically switched places with the lion and saved the princess from a terrible death. For this performance, the stage was decorated with elaborate hanging fabrics and many lit lanterns, as well as several performers dressed in period costumes. However, as the illusion began, one of the lanterns set fire to a piece of hanging fabric, creating a column of flame on the stage. The audience, expecting impressive special effects and incredible illusions, reacted with surprise and applause, unaware that this was not part of the show. After many devastating theatre fires throughout history, the Empire Theatre naturally had a strong, fully functional safety curtain. As the fire spread, it was lowered to separate the stage from the audience. Unfortunately, the curtain jammed a few inches above the floor, leaving a gap. That gap acted like a chimney, allowing air to flow in and further feed the fire. As a result, the blaze on stage worsened rapidly, although the safety curtain did protect the audience from most of the smoke and flames. The live band began playing the national anthem to keep people calm, and spectators were asked to evacuate in an orderly manner. Within minutes, all 3,000 attendees had exited the theatre. There were no serious injuries and no lives lost among the audience. Behind the stage, however, the situation was completely different. There were several exits at the back of the stage, but in order to protect the secrets that made his tricks possible, and out of fear that the lion might escape, Sigmund had insisted that they be firmly locked during every performance. With the stage blocked by smoke, flames and the partially lowered curtain, dozens of people backstage were trapped. Sigmund managed to escape through one of the few exits that had not been locked, but as soon as he got outside, he realised that his horse was still inside, and he went back into the building to try to rescue the animal. He did not succeed. The fire consumed the theatre. Sigmund Neuberger, the lion, the horse, and 10 members of his company died in the blaze. The theatre was severely damaged by smoke and flames. Once the fire was brought under control, workers searched for bodies among the ruins. They found several, including what they believed to be the body of the great Lafayette. It was taken to a local funeral home and cremated, only for workers to discover, the following day, the true body of the magician beneath the stage. The first person they had found had been Sigmund's body double, dressed and made up to resemble him as part of the show. The real remains of Sigmund Neuberger were also cremated and carried with great ceremony to the cemetery, where his faithful pet already rested. Nearly 250,000 people lined the streets to watch as the great magician was taken to his final resting place. The urn containing his ashes was placed between Beauty's paws, and a striking white marble headstone was placed over the plot. The 10 stagehands, assistants, musicians and performers who had died in the fire were also buried. These funerals took place in different cities across the country, and in many cases drew large crowds of people who had heard about the tragedy and were deeply moved. Alice Dale, 15 years old, who played a mechanical bear in the show, and her understudy, 12-year-old Joseph Coates, were taken to Sheffield to be buried. Their small coffins were escorted to a cemetery there, as 10,000 people filled the streets to bid them farewell. These scenes were repeated across the country as the coffins of those who had died in the fire were transported back to their homes by train. After this disaster, it became accepted practice to test a theatre's safety curtain at least once before every performance, raising and lowering it to ensure it would not jam if it were ever needed. This standard, followed by most theatres in the United Kingdom, is sometimes known as the Lafayette Law, although there is no indication that it was ever written into law. The Empire Theatre was restored and rebuilt as the Festival Theatre, an institution that continues to entertain thousands of spectators to this day. Some people who worked there have occasionally reported sightings of a figure they believe to be the ghost of the great Lafayette. He is still remembered as a great magician and showman. His death is part of the long history of a storied theatre. His grave still remains in the city's cemetery, where he, his beloved dog, and 10 of his colleagues and crew members lost their lives.